back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'll tell you what, we are positively going north of the border in this one. I've tried to keep calm and stay local and do all those things we talk about here on a daily basis. But I was down at Lexington Market a couple months ago, and a fella came up to me and said, "Hey, man, I do this thing like Imagine Cities. I see what you're doing, Baltimore Positive. I do cities, and I do how we make cities better." And I went to his website. It's called ImagineCities.com. It says, "Join the movement here. We are all city builders." And I want to welcome on for the first time a guy who handed me a card, followed up with an email, and said, "Let's talk about making cities better." And I said, "Well, that's what Baltimore Positive's all about." I want to welcome on, and I'm going to pronounce this right because I've been working on this, Ron Jaicarran from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where the Flames used to play some hockey, and they had an Olympics there many years ago. My wife has been trying to get me to Banff, Iran, on the train, the whole deal. I know how much I would love it. At one point, I had 30 hockey rinks and 30 nights planned, and that all went by the wayside. My wife got leukemia the second time. So I had a plan at one point. I had a flight plan to come to Calgary. Just haven't been there, but I've been to Vancouver a few times. And I love the Canadian people, Ron. You know that. So a pleasure to have you aboard. Welcome in. And first off, what were you doing at Lexington Market that day?
I just went to go get some crab cakes, and I overheard your conversation. You're recording an episode there, and I thought it was just really cool what you were doing, and then we just chatted for a bit, and I mean the idea that you're just trying to make your city better just really intrigued me, Nestor, and
thank you.
It's exciting to see people take their time and their energy to do that.
Well, I don't know what else I have to do. I live at the harbor, and it came to me about 2 summers ago. My wife and I were like, we've lived here 15 years. We love where we live. We don't really want to live on the east side of the harbor because we like getting to the airport, although that's, I can't come and fly and see you now. And if I did fly and see you, I'd have to stay 6.5 feet away from you. So, the world has changed dramatically in these couple of months since you stopped by the world-famous Fadley's to have a crab cake with us, and we met. And, my passion in this is that I've lived here for 50 years, Ron, and, I've done sports radio, and I watched them build Camden Yards. I watched them lure and National Football League team that your city couldn't do, right? And win 2 Super Bowls and have parades, and I've seen us also, watch as our school children aren't properly educated, and we've had riots here, and we have clear crime issues here, and clear job opportunity problems here, and the squeegee boy thing that I don't even know that I could explain to other people in other places because I've never seen it anywhere else, because it's not a very good idea for anyone to be having young people out playing in traffic. So all of that being said, you live in this sort of semi-civilized place as I see Calgary, Alberta, and your passion in doing cities and Imagine Cities. Give me a little bit of background on, what were you doing in Baltimore? And I would think for someone that has a passion about building cities, I care about my city. Now I'm trying to learn from people like you about, hey, how did they build Medellin? And, how have they figured out things in the Far East? When I went to Seoul 5 months ago, and I went to Tokyo 5 months ago and saw how things sort of operate there, I want our city to operate better in all sorts of ways. And people like you spend a lifetime studying this stuff, right?
Yeah, so prior to living in Calgary, I was raised in Toronto and worked in public policy at the city of Toronto, and just got to understand cities. I don't have a background in urban planning. My background is in history, to be honest. And it was from there that I started up Imagine Cities, because there's so many people from around the world that I found through my research who are just doing amazing things trying to improve their city. And from there, I did my master's, which looked at smart cities and the use of data in cities. The reason I was in Baltimore is because my partner had some work there. She works in diversity and inclusion, and she had some work there, and I just came with her to visit. And
How many
I
cities have you been to, a guy like you? Like, so, I mean, I've been to Toronto many, many times. I know my way around. I can drive to, the QEW and, all of that. I could find my way to Pearson. I know my way around, and I also love Geddy Lee, too, in Russia. That's another reason to come. I love hockey, too. But I'm wearing my Toronto Maple Leafs blue jacket for you here. So they loved me in Toronto a few years ago when I came up for the Caps. I've been to cities all over the world, right? Like, I love traveling. I loved Hong Kong. I love Australia. We went to Auckland. I didn't like that very much. I love islands. I've been all over Europe. We haven't been to Africa yet, but we went back to Asia. Seeing the how Tokyo was built and how it is built and how it's constructed and how people move around and what they do with trash there, like it's eye-opening for, anyone who is from the Western world, I think, who's just, quite frankly, a kid from Dundalk, right, with a dream, right? Like, I'm just a dude, right, getting on a plane and going to these places, and I see some cities get better, Ron, and I see some places sort of deteriorate as a tourist, as a guy that's going in and staying at, Marriott X or Hilton Y and going to ballpark there or getting an Uber here or getting a craft beer there or finding a little hippie shop over here to do some vintage shop. The things I do, finding barbecue in a city, finding fresh fish in Seattle, finding the best schnitzel I can find in Cologne. My wife and I had a plan to go to Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago. Her donor was getting married. We wanted to do the tulips. I love Amsterdam. I know it's sinking. I sort of kind of know why, but what could they do to save it? Venice, ditto, right? So now we're seeing the emptiness of all these places, and the water starts to get cleaned out, and the fish start to show up, and the ducks start landing. I've seen it in my own harbor where we were out in the harbor a week ago, and my wife saw ducks she's never seen. We've lived here 17 years. Weird things are happening in the world right now as we have this quiet time, and I want to know how, when we get out of this, what we're going to be doing to grow vegetables in West Baltimore to feed Baltimoreans now that we have this issue about getting farm food to table in this chain of things that has been broken here because of COVID, right? COVID's going to change the world, Ron.
It is, and it really highlights the broken system, like you said. I think that, like, if we pull back, I think that every city you go to has amazing positive things that are happening there, including Baltimore, and then the negative stuff, right? So you mentioned Tokyo. Well, Tokyo has an issue of extreme density, right? And that extreme density is leading to issues of depression, issues of isolation. Even though there are so many people there, there are folks who are actively studying the impact of high-level, super density, extreme levels of density.
And we've never had that on Earth, right? Like, literally, when we talk about coronavirus and Wuhan and, like, I have flown into Sao Paulo, Brazil. I have been in Buenos Aires. I have been in Beijing. I've been in these places that you cannot express to people. And you say, well, you've flown over New York. Yeah, I've seen New York. It's the biggest. No, New York's the biggest thing you've seen. It's only because you haven't flown over Beijing, or Sao Paulo or some of these other places where my jaw drops. It's like something out of Willy Wonka, when you hover over one of those areas or Tokyo being one of them, and you'd say, oh my God, how did all of these people get here, and how did they build the thing straight up, especially in a fault zone too, Ron, right? So
yeah, and I mean, when you look at, you spoke about Amsterdam. So Amsterdam, you said, is flooding, and that is true. But what Amsterdam's been able to do is identify the issues that they face and organize in order to deal with those issues. So Amsterdam does a really good job at building the capacity for flooding. So they build parks that can flood, for example. They protect their wetlands because they know their wetlands keep water out. And they've done a lot of engineering and design to mitigate that the flooding and the increasing amount of flooding that they expect in the future. When you pull back and you look at cities, cities are not what they once used to be, in the sense that we all kind of have our high-strung ideas. You elect officials that have these out-of-the-box ideas where they're like, I'm going to do this, and this is what's going to happen. Cities have been studied. We collect data on cities now because now we can better. So I'll give you an example. Jane Jacobs, she observed that good neighborhoods propel people and propel human potential. And so that was in the 70s, 80s that she observed that. And now you have MIT and Raj Chetty through the Opportunity Insights program who have been able to use U.S. Census data to actually prove that, to show that there's a direct correlation between the quality of your neighborhood and where you end up with regards to your earning potential. So,
there's studies in Baltimore that I've seen, as well. Your zip code determines your future, and that's something we have to change, right?
100%. And I think that when you look at your city, and I'm sure you can list off some great things about your city.
I do every day.
And then you can also admittedly take a look and say, okay, there's some issues we have to deal with. So when you look at city building, there's an organization called the World Council on City Data, and they collect data across 100 city building indicators. And you can identify which areas, through data, you can identify which areas you need to improve upon and which areas that you're doing well in, and you can maintain that. The Social Progress Index is another one that you can look at. And the great thing about the Social Progress Index is that you can look at improvement year over year. So let's look at an economic development, for example. Economic development ties in quite a few things. You're looking at the quality of your education system, your quality of your post-secondary system. And the way that we created jobs in the past is not the way that we're going to create jobs in the future when we're looking at the new economy and the fourth industrial revolution. So I'll give you an example of New York. So you remember when Amazon did their HQ2 proposal, and
of course, and all the cities were bidding to give away tax breaks and for the jobs and for the economy, and obviously Amazon was going to pick wherever they were going to go, and New Jersey was pitted against New York, right? Literally, right?
Yeah.
Counties pitting against, Hartford County was pitted against Baltimore County, I'm sure, right?
Exactly, but when you look at the places that Amazon chose, and you look at those indicators, they correlate with the needs of Amazon. So let's take New York, for example, right? So New York protested Amazon, and they said, hey, Amazon, we don't want you here. Well, some folks did. And Amazon pulled back, and they pulled their funding, and I think New York was going to give them $3 billion. And then what happened is that they must have pulled back and took a look at their indicators, the talent that they need, the housing that they're going to need for that talent, mobility systems to move people around. And if you take a look, Amazon is now buying up office buildings in New York, and they're technically opening up their HQ2 there without the subsidies, because ultimately New York has what Amazon needs, right? So, and there's nowhere else that has the kinds of talent that Amazon needs in order to do that. And so Amazon goes there without the subsidies.
So instead of going to Bentonville, Arkansas, right, or wherever, creating the airport that FedEx did in Memphis, let's say, right? Creating a hub somewhere that isn't already New York. Look, A-Rod and J-Lo got married too, right? The bigger the star, that's literally the way this works, right? The rich get richer. That's sort of the way our society's built, right?
Yeah, so that's a different conversation around.
Well, but for them to open up shop in Boise, Idaho, to proclaim that their world headquarters, the way I guess Nike did Beaverton or wherever, or Under Armour did Baltimore, right? To say this is where we're going to be. being in New York is still everybody's best bet to some degree, right?
To some degree, but you're going to find more and more that certain regions are going to specialize in certain things. So, for example, Calgary specializes in energy. Houston specializes in energy. And what companies see is that those regions have the ecosystem necessary to support the companies they're trying to build, right? So when you think of talent, right, we in Calgary have an ecosystem that is built to support the energy sector. So talent, we have the research, we have the mobility systems, and all of that integrated into this ecosystem that allows for what they call a self-perpetuating system. So,
well, and that would be Silicon Valley or any of those. The same way the steel industry popped up in Pittsburgh, right? And the port popped up in Baltimore and not in Dubuque, right? So using your natural resources, but then, I mean, with Calgary, was there anything naturally resourceful about Calgary that would have been different if they would have built that in Edmonton or Regina?
Yeah, I think that like with Calgary, we had the oil sands, and
Fair enough.
that like kind of spurred the industry here, and now we're looking, as well as supporting the energy industry, we're looking to pivot as well, right?
See, I just think of you as rodeo. You know what I mean? It shows you how little I know.
Yeah, I mean, we've been an oil and gas town for a long time, and we bring in a lot of that talent, and we have a lot of that talent here. Our post-secondaries are built to support that industry. But going back to the indicators, I mentioned before 100 different indicators. So you're looking at things like housing, mobility.
Give me that indices again. I want to look that up, so I'm looking at it while we're talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. So the World Council on City Data, the WCCD, and then the second one is the Social Progress Index. Those are two that I kind of like.
Okay.
And the idea is that we study cities, we increasingly understand cities. So now we can then say cities need these resources in order to do X, Y, and Z. So when we look at economic development, the cities that perform the best are the cities that not only have economic opportunity, but also cities that provide a great quality of life.
Well, quality of life, right? So when you say quality of life, where does that index come in? What does that mean? What factors say quality of life, and how many are there? Yeah, I used to just think it was an NFL team, by the way, but that was when I was in my 20s, Ron. So.
Yeah, I mean,
as long as the Stones come to town every couple years, you live in a good place, so.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm 52 now. I want things like running water and a good tax base, and we have hospitals, university. We have incredible resources in Baltimore. So when it comes to fixing Baltimore, that's what my whole bent was about. And the biggest question I have, and I think for anyone, and I would ask this for any city around the world, because the one thing that I notice when I go to cities around the world is when I go to like Mexico and I stay a little while, I come home and I'm really sick. And I would have been told that about India. I've never been to India, although I do want to go. China, literally the State Department, when I went with a State Department trip to Beijing with Cal Ripken in 2007, they gave me a book, and it said, "Don't open your eyes in the shower. The water could infect you." And I'm like, what? And this was like at the St. Regis, right? So water, and obviously global warming, and what water represents, and knowing that when I walk into Las Vegas and go into a casino and get the tap water, I can't drink it. It tastes like soap. Same thing in Southern California. When I'm in Florida, it tastes like salt water. When I'm in Pennsylvania, it tastes delicious. When I'm in New Hampshire with my wife, it's delicious. So I know the water's different. When I'm in Canada, do you trust the water? When I'm in Australia, I kind of trust the water. New Zealand, you know what I mean? Like tap water. I've been drinking Baltimore tap water my whole life. Maybe it explains my good looks, but I do know that water really worries me, and global warming, and you talk about floodplains. what we've seen in New Orleans. You talk about cities being built for floods, or like Amsterdam. Is there a city in the world that's getting water really right in some way? Obviously, we know about Flint, Michigan, right? But I would think that water will be the one thing that could really, really screw up a place that would be the next thing like coronavirus, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are quite a few cities that do water right. I think what the conversation was with regards to Flint is the ability to pay for that infrastructure, right? And the ability to pay for that infrastructure and maintain that infrastructure. And they in Flint, and the federal government didn't step in to be able to provide their citizens with basic necessities. And I think you're seeing that throughout the Western world, and you're seeing the result of that is this rise of populism, where you have leaders that may not completely get it. When
I get on a subway anywhere, Ron, anywhere, and I was in New York right before COVID, every time I go into the subway, I look up and I look around at the station and I think someone bet their political life on this that would never see it built. And I don't know in 2020 whether we have anyone with that kind of courage. I mean, I literally, I had Martin O'Malley on. I don't remember who my guest was the day that you were there, but Martin O'Malley talked about doing all of this stuff for the Bay that, now 10 years later, he can write a book and say, we did this and we have more oysters and we have more, all of that, more oxygen, all of that, right? That we built a better Bay, but it certainly didn't make him popular on rain taxes and whatnot. And when I go into subways, and I was in Hong Kong, 13, 14 years ago, and I'm on the bullet train, and I was in Tokyo and seeing the infrastructure there and thinking like, who in America is going to stand up and say we can't be the next city poisoned by our water? Like, what the hell's wrong with you people? We just lived through a virus where nobody went to work for I don't know how many more months because we're still in the middle of it, Ron. So, I think about like smart cities and smart government and how we're going to get to a point where we're so ill, we're so sick, we're so demented that we would elect Donald Trump and then wonder what the hell happens in the aftermath, or in our city, elect these crooks like Catherine Pugh. Now we have Sheila Dixon, who was stolen from the citizens, trying to be elected again. And I think to myself, like, at some point, in order to survive, we're going to have to, like, at least know that the tap water's running and when we flush the toilet, it works. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to become a very, very basic thing if I live long enough, right? I'm 52.
Yeah, I think that we need to also pull back and say who is responsible for all of this. And I think that we've put all the responsibility on government, or most of the responsibility on government, but we're all responsible. The private sector is responsible, government's responsible, residents are responsible, our nonprofit and charitable sectors are responsible, and we all play a role. We all play different roles, right? Like, we often hear that, government is attacked, but, government created the internet, right? Government helped fund the initial Google algorithm. Government helped do a lot of things.
Government sent everybody a $1,200 check that's listening right here. You know what I mean? Like, and yes, it was your money, but like, government is greatly aiding everything in your refrigerator happening right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're talking about taking away the mail system. I just voted last week, and we're going to be voting again in a couple of weeks for a mayor here by using the mail system. I mean, these people who want to burn down the government, they're just out of it. They're ignorant. They just have not literally thought it through. You can not like the government, then change it. But to think that you're going to abolish it and move progress forward as a culture, as a society, is just it's batshit lunacy. It really is.
Like, let's take an example, the Cold War, right? And we look. So the government created the science behind what we now call canned goods, the way to preserve that type of food. And it was because we didn't know if there was going to be a nuclear war, and if there was, we needed to feed people. So the government created the science behind it, and then they gave it to the private sector and said, make this available everywhere. And the canned goods became available everywhere. So if there was a nuclear war, people would hopefully have the means to get the canned goods and store them.
Was that made for food rations in war? I mean, when I think of
it was originally made for food rations.
See, I didn't look that up. I didn't even know that. That just sort of made sense, right?
Yeah, and that's like an example of how the private sector and public sector can work together to figure things out, right? And when you look at food, I can give you nonprofit examples, I can give you government examples, I can give you private sector examples of companies and organizations that are doing an amazing job trying to solve food security. When you look at places like San Antonio, where you see a parking lot full of cars that are just trying to access food at the food bank, you kind of pull back and you think to yourself, why can't people access food?
We had Carmen Del Guecho on from the Maryland Food Bank last week talking about the issues we have here. I had Tim Bojanowski of Baltimore Positive last month. Literally, the first week, Ron, of COVID, where we all, anyone smart, the really smart people knew that 5 weeks later we were going to have a food chain issue. The idiot running the country telling the pig farmers they have to go kill pigs and somehow get them to market. I don't know what none of it makes any sense. None of it's very scientific. None of it involves people like you. Ron, I tell you what, I want to bring you back on again soon and extend the conversation a little further, maybe even have a little bit more structure. It's really nice to know you, nice to have you on. Tell everybody how to find you again and what you do at Imagine Cities so people can go out and learn a little bit more. And I will fast pass you back on to getting back in here next month and talking some more with us about this, because water's the homework here. I think water's the key for me, and obviously infrastructure. And just we're facing that challenge as Baltimore being one of the first cities that was built, on this continent so many years ago, right?
Yeah, for myself, if anyone wants to get in contact, they imaginecities.com. We're a cities research and innovation nonprofit. We have volunteers from across Canada and the U.S. We had volunteers from Brooklyn. So, reach out if you want to connect and volunteer with our work. I think that ultimately we need to come back to understanding that we all are all city builders. We all play a role, and we have to come back and build community. And by identifying our problems and bringing together the private sector, the public sector, we can move forward to solving those problems. And all cities are great. They all have great things about them. And it isn't to say that what I'm trying to say is that we also have to admit where our faults are and try to work together to solve them. But thanks for having me on, Nestor. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna get the pronunciation right. Ron Jaicarran, is that right?
Perfect.
Nice. I got it right. He came up for a crab cake at Fadley's a couple weeks ago during Baltimore Positive with Don Moeller and I, and told me what he did, and I'm like, wow, you'll be a great guest. And you were. I really appreciate the time, Ron. Thanks for coming on, pal.
Thanks, Nestor. You have a great day.
You got it. Ron Jaicarran from ImagineCities.com. They're in Calgary, Canada. An energy city. See, I didn't even Google that. When I go into places, I learn about them, right? I'm like, I got to read. I got to know. I got to figure out how to get here. I got to find this temple. I got to find this fish market. I got to find this place, this space. So we do that stuff. So that's sort of what I do. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net. We did sports for a long time around here. We still do sports when there are sports. There's tons of stuff with Eric Edholm and Lance Zierlein from NFL.com on the NFL draft. I'll put my purple jacket on for that. It's my Colts throwback jacket. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. In Baltimore, locked down but not wearing a mask because I'm 6 feet away from my wife. And enjoying the purple glow of the magma lamp here from Sporticulture. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, keeping calm, staying local, except when we go to Calgary. Although it feels local. We're in the same hemisphere, same planet. It's all local, right? And stay in Baltimore positive, of course.